The air in the service stairwell was always different. It smelled of cold concrete, disinfectant, and the faint, metallic ghost of rushed footsteps. It was a place between places, a forgotten artery in the glittering body of the Blackwood Grand Hotel. For me, it had become a sanctuary of sorts, the only place where the weight of 1,000 expectations didn't press down on my shoulders. Tonight, that weight was literal. It was a cardboard box, worn at the corners, sealed with packing tape that was losing its grip. Inside was the last of a life I was trying to forget, a life before this uniform, before the polite smiles and the bone-deep exhaustion. I'd been on my feet for 14 hours. A gala for some tech billionaire had bled into an impromptu after-party, and every hand was needed on deck. My own hands ached, my back was a dull throb of protest, and my thoughts were a slow, syrupy crawl toward my tiny apartment and the blessed oblivion of sleep. The box was the final hurdle. I couldn't leave it in my locker anymore. It felt like keeping a ghost in a cage. I just had to get it out to my car without being seen, without having to explain the pathetic collection of books, chipped mugs, and faded photographs that constituted my worldly possessions. I shifted the box in my arms, the cardboard digging into my forearms. It wasn't heavy, not really, but it felt immense, a monument to failure. I took a breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and started down the stairs. My dress shoes, impeccably polished hours ago, slipped on a patch of condensation I didn't see. My ankle twisted. The box flew from my grasp, tumbling end over end down the flight of stairs with a series of sickening thuds before bursting open on the landing below. Books splayed open, pages crumpled. A photograph in a cheap frame skittered to a stop against the wall, and a chipped ceramic mug, painted with a ridiculous cartoon dog, rolled in a slow, wobbling circle before settling with a gentle clink. I just stood there, frozen on the step, my ankle screaming a sharp, hot protest. Humiliation washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was one thing to be failing in private. It was another to have the evidence scattered across the cold floor of a forgotten stairwell. A sound from the landing above made me flinch. A heavy fire door scraped open, its pneumatic hiss echoing in the quiet space. Footsteps descended, slow and measured. Not the frantic clatter of a kitchen porter or the brisk tread of a manager. These were solid, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who owned the ground he walked on. I didn't need to look up. I knew who it was. Arthur Blackwood. He was a presence in the hotel, more myth than man. He owned this building, and dozens like it across the globe. I'd only ever seen him from a distance, a tall figure in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair more salt than pepper, his face a study in calm authority. He moved through his world with a quiet confidence that I could only dream of. And now, he was standing on the landing above me, looking down at the scattered wreckage of my life. I tried to move, to scramble down the stairs and gather my things, but my ankle buckled, sending a fresh spike of pain up my leg. I ended up sitting heavily on the step, my head in my hands, wishing the concrete would just swallow me whole. This was it. Fired for being a clumsy, pathetic mess in a service corridor. His footsteps stopped. I braced myself for the cold, dismissive tone, the order to clean up my disaster and report to human resources in the morning. Instead, there was only silence. A long, stretching silence that felt more unnerving than any reprimand. Finally, I forced myself to look up. He was standing on the landing below me now, next to the spilled contents of my box. He wasn't looking at me. His attention was on the chipped mug. He bent down, his movements fluid and graceful for a man of his size and age, and picked it up. He turned it over in his large, capable hands, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" His voice was low and resonant, calmer than I had expected. It didn't carry the sharp edge of annoyance I was prepared for. It was just a question. A simple, direct question. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I'm sorry. I'll have this cleaned up immediately." I tried to push myself up again, but the pain was too sharp. I sank back with a hiss of breath. He looked from the mug to me, his gaze finally meeting mine. His eyes were a dark, thoughtful gray, and for the first time, I saw something other than corporate power in them. It looked like concern. He took in my awkward position on the stairs, the way I was favoring my ankle. "Stay put," he said. It wasn't a command so much as a piece of gentle advice. He placed the mug carefully back on the floor and began gathering my things. He picked up the books, straightening the bent corners of the pages with a surprising delicacy. He retrieved the photograph, wiping a smudge from the glass with his thumb before setting it aside. He worked in a methodical silence, neatly stacking everything back into the broken box. I just watched, dumbfounded. Arthur Blackwood, the billionaire hotelier, was on his hands and knees in a concrete stairwell, picking up my junk. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest, but I choked it down. When everything was back in the box, he stood up, holding it easily in one arm. He looked at me again, his expression still quiet, still assessing. "Can you stand?" "I think so," I mumbled, ashamed. I used the handrail to pull myself up, putting as little weight as possible on my injured ankle. I managed to get to my feet, swaying slightly. The pain was a persistent, angry pulse now. He was beside me in 2 long strides, his presence solid and grounding. A faint scent of expensive cologne and clean linen reached me, a world away from the stairwell's sterile smell. He didn't touch me, not yet. He just stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Which way is your car?" he asked. "Level P3, sir. But I can manage." "Please, you don't have to." My voice sounded thin and reedy. He ignored my protestations. He shifted the box to his other arm, freeing the hand closer to me. "Let's go," he said, and started to move toward the door to the parking garage. I hobbled after him, my face burning. The walk across the cold, echoing garage felt like a mile. Every step was a fresh agony. I was concentrating so hard on not falling that I didn't realize he had slowed his pace to match my own painful shuffle. We reached my car, a decade-old sedan with a dent in the passenger door, parked in the far corner reserved for staff. It looked like a dinghy next to a fleet of yachts. He waited patiently as I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I finally managed to unlock the doors. He opened the back and placed the box gently on the seat. Then he closed the door and turned to face me. The fluorescent lights of the garage cast stark shadows on his face, making him look both tired and imposing. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm very sorry for the trouble." He just looked at me for a long moment. His gray eyes seemed to see right through the starched uniform and the professional veneer, down to the exhausted, scared kid underneath. I felt utterly exposed. "It was no trouble, Leo," he said. Using my first name was a small thing, but it sent a jolt through me. He knew my name. Of course he did. It was on my uniform name tag. But the way he said it felt different. Personal. I must have swayed again, because he reached out, his hand closing gently around my upper arm to steady me. His touch was firm and warm, a solid anchor in my dizzying world. It wasn't a gesture of power or pity. It was just support. "You're hurt," he stated, his gaze dropping to my ankle. "You shouldn't drive. I'll be fine," I insisted, though we both knew it was a lie. "I just need to sit for a minute." He didn't argue. He just kept his hand on my arm, a silent, steadying pressure. I found myself leaning into the touch, just slightly, drawing strength from it. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "I have a driver. He can take you home, and someone from my staff will see your car gets back to you tomorrow." "No, I couldn't possibly." "It's not a request," he said it without heat. A simple statement of fact. His gaze held mine, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something I couldn't name. It wasn't impatience. It was resolve. He led me to the private elevator, the one that went straight to the penthouse levels and his personal garage. The whole time, his hand never left my arm. It felt like he was holding me together. As we waited for the elevator, he glanced down at the box in my back seat. Then he looked back at me, at the weariness etched on my face. His thumb stroked my arm, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "That box looks heavy," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It's not," I said automatically. "It's just a lot to carry." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. He guided me inside. The interior was all polished wood and soft light, a world away from the concrete and steel I was used to. He pressed the button for his private garage. The doors slid shut, encasing us in a quiet, intimate space. He turned to me, his expression serious. "Leo," he said, and my name in his mouth was a sound I felt I could get used to. "Let me help you with the heavy things." He paused, his gray eyes searching mine. "I'll carry you, too, if you let me." My breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to stop for a second. The elevator's gentle hum, the faint scent of his cologne, the solid warmth of his hand on my arm. It all coalesced into a single, sharp point of awareness. He wasn't just talking about the box. I knew he wasn't. And in that moment, in the soft light of that elevator, looking into the eyes of this powerful, quiet man, the most shocking thing was that I wanted to let him. I really, truly wanted to let him. The days that followed the incident in the stairwell were strange. I expected repercussions. A formal warning, a transfer to a less visible department, or just the cold, awkward silence that follows a breach of the unspoken caste system. Instead, nothing happened. Or rather, nothing overt. I showed up for my next shift, my ankle wrapped and throbbing, and went about my duties with my head down, avoiding eye contact. But the world had shifted on its axis. 2 days later, I was called into the office of the hotel manager, a perpetually stressed woman named Maria. I walked in expecting the worst. She gestured for me to sit, her expression uncharacteristically neutral. "Leo," she began, folding her hands on her pristine desk. "There's been a change in your duties. Mr. Blackwood has a project he needs assistance with. Archival work. Cataloging old hotel records, photographs, that sort of thing. It's quiet work. Off your feet, mostly. You'll be reporting directly to his executive assistant, but the workspace is adjacent to his own office suite on the penthouse floor." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the words. The penthouse floor. It was a place I'd only ever seen on blueprints, a realm as distant as the moon. I don't understand. I don't have any experience with archival work. Mr. Blackwood was specific, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. He believes you have the right temperament for it. Attention to detail. Discretion. She handed me a folder. Your new access card is in here. Your hours will be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You start tomorrow, and that was it. I was dismissed. I walked out of her office in a daze, the folder feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. He had done this. Arthur Blackwood had plucked me from the anonymous grind of hotel service and placed me at the quiet center of his world. It wasn't a rescue, not exactly. It was too subtle for that. It was a rearrangement. He had seen I was hurt, seen I was struggling, and he had quietly, decisively, changed the circumstances. He hadn't asked. He had just acted. The power in that was terrifying, and, to a part of me I didn't want to acknowledge, deeply comforting. The archival room was less a room and more a large, climate-controlled alcove off the main corridor of the penthouse suite. It was lined with handsome mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound ledgers and heavy albums. A large wooden table served as a desk, and a comfortable, ergonomic chair sat waiting for me. Through a set of frosted glass doors, I could see the silhouette of Arthur's main office. He was in there, a shadow moving behind the glass. His assistant, a polite, efficient woman named Eleanor, gave me a brief tour and explained the task. I was to scan and digitize decades of guest ledgers, photographs of the hotel's construction, and old press clippings. It was meticulous, solitary work, and after the chaos of the main floors, the silence was a balm. For the first week, I barely saw him. I would hear the low murmur of his voice on the phone, see his shadow past the glass doors. He would arrive before me and leave after me. But his presence was a constant hum beneath the surface of my quiet work. A tray with coffee and a pastry would appear on my desk mid-morning, delivered by a silent staffer. When I worked through lunch, a simple, elegant meal would be left for me. I never saw who brought it, but I knew who arranged it. These were quiet acts of care, delivered with a distance that respected my boundaries while simultaneously making me feel seen. I started to observe him, to learn the rhythms of his day. I learned the sound of his footsteps in the hall. I learned that he took his coffee black, that he often paced when he was on a difficult call, his shadow a restless back-and-forth movement behind the glass. I saw powerful people in expensive suits come and go from his office, their faces grim on the way in and thoughtful on the way out. Through it all, his silhouette remained a pillar of calm authority. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into my new role, I was carefully turning the brittle pages of a photo album from the 1950s. It was filled with black and white pictures of the hotel's grand opening. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear him approach. Finding anything interesting? His voice, so close behind me, made me jump. I turned in my chair, my heart hammering. He was standing there, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him. in dark trousers and a soft gray cashmere sweater that made him look less like a titan of industry and more like a handsome, distinguished professor. "Mr. Blackwood," I stammered. "I didn't hear you." A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "That was the idea. I didn't want to startle you. And please, call me Arthur." He placed one of the mugs on the table beside me. The warmth from it seeped into the wood. "I brought you a coffee, thank you," I said, my voice quiet. He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the table, his hip resting near the corner, and looked down at the album. He was close enough that I could smell that same clean, subtle cologne. It was a scent I was beginning to associate with safety. "The grand opening," he said, his voice tinged with a faint nostalgia. "My grandfather is in that one." He pointed a long finger at a photo of a group of men in tuxedos cutting a ribbon. He indicated a stern-looking man with the same dark, intelligent eyes. "He built this place from nothing. He was a hard man. Believed that if you weren't working, you were wasting oxygen." "He looks formidable," I said, unsure of what else to say. Arthur chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "That's a polite word for it. He would have hated this project." "The past is past, boy," he'd say. "Look forward." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes still on the photograph. "I disagree. I think you need to understand where you've come from to know where you're going." He looked at me then, and his gaze was direct, searching. "Don't you?" The question hung in the air between us. He was talking about the hotel, about his grandfather. But it felt like he was talking about something else entirely. About the box in the stairwell. About the life I was running from. "I suppose so," I answered, my voice barely audible. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded, as if I'd confirmed something for him. He pushed off the table. "Well, let me know if you find any ghosts in those ledgers." He gave me another one of those small, rare smiles and walked back toward his office, leaving me with a rapidly beating heart and a warm mug of coffee. It was the first time we had a real conversation, and it left me unsettled. He was peeling back his own layers, just slightly, and in doing so, he was inviting me to do the same. I spent the rest of the afternoon analyzing every word, every look. The way he'd said my name. The way his eyes had softened when he talked about his grandfather. I was reading tea leaves, searching for meaning in the smallest gestures. A few days later, a new routine began. Around 3 in the afternoon, he would emerge from his office, coffee mug in hand, and come to lean against my work table. He'd ask about my progress, but it was just an opener. From there, the conversation would drift. He'd ask about a book I was reading, or a piece of music I had playing softly on my computer. He told me about the cities he'd traveled to, not in a boastful way, but with a quiet reflectiveness, describing the light in a Venetian alleyway or the taste of street food in Bangkok. I found myself opening up, slowly, cautiously. I told him about growing up in a small town, about my abandoned dream of being a librarian. I never talked about the failed relationship that had brought me to this city with nothing but that box of memories. I kept that part locked away. But still, I shared more of myself with him in those quiet afternoon conversations than I had with anyone in years. During one of these talks, he was looking at a photograph I had just scanned. It showed a young couple dancing in the hotel ballroom in the 1960s. They were laughing, lost in their own world. "They look happy," I remarked. "They do," he agreed. He was standing beside my chair, looking down at the screen. To point something out in the photo's background, he leaned in closer, placing his hand on the back of my chair to steady himself. His other hand rested lightly on the desk beside my own. Our hands were inches apart. I could feel the heat of his body, a solid, living presence that made the air feel thick. He didn't seem to notice the proximity, or if he did, he gave no sign. He talked about the changes in the ballroom's decor over the years, his voice a low rumble beside my ear. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was acutely aware of his knuckles, almost brushing against mine, of the faint, clean scent of his skin, of the way the soft cashmere of his sleeve grazed my shoulder. My breath hitched. I could have moved my hand. I could have leaned away. It would have been easy, natural, but I didn't. I stayed perfectly still, caught in a strange, suspended moment. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, both terrified and thrilled by the drop. He finished what he was saying and straightened up. He moved away, taking the warmth and the tension with him. "Time for another meeting," he said, his voice back to its usual calm measure. "Keep up the good work, Leo." He walked away, and I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hand was tingling where his had almost touched it. It was a meaningless moment. A simple, accidental proximity. It meant nothing. But my heart was pounding, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it meant everything. The quiet afternoons became the anchor of my days. The work was a pleasant, methodical hum, but the real focus was that hour, sometimes two, when Arthur would emerge from his office and the space between us would shrink. The conversations deepened, moving from pleasantries to something more substantial. We talked about books, films, the strange turns life takes. He had a dry, understated wit that emerged when he was relaxed, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. He had a way of asking questions that were both simple and profound. He never pried, but he invited honesty. "What do you miss most about your hometown?" he asked one day. And I found myself telling him about the smell of rain on hot asphalt and the specific shade of green the trees turned in early summer, details I hadn't thought about in a decade. He listened, his full attention on me, making me feel as if my small memories were as important as his multi-million-dollar business deals. One rainy Thursday, he found me staring at a page in an old guest ledger from the hotel's first year of operation. The handwriting was a beautiful, looping cursive. The penmanship was an art form back then, he said, his voice a quiet presence beside me. It was, I agreed. "Look at this entry. Mr. and Mr. Alastair Finch, from 1928". I pointed to the line. "They stayed for 2 weeks in the Rose Suite. I just wonder about them. What their story was. It must have been so difficult then." Arthur was silent for a long moment, studying the entry. I risked a glance at him. His expression was thoughtful, a little sad. "My grandfather was a product of his time," he said softly. "He believed in rules, in order. But the first manager he ever hired, a man named Robert, was a confirmed bachelor, as they used to say. He lived his whole life with his companion my grandfather knew. He never spoke of it, but he kept Robert on for 40 years. Protected him." He looked at me, his gray eyes holding a depth of understanding that made my throat tighten. "Some people build walls," he said. "And some people, quietly, build shelters." In that moment, I understood what he had done for me. He had seen me in that stairwell, broken and exposed, and he had quietly built a shelter. This job, this quiet room, these conversations, it was all a shelter. The realization was so overwhelming that I had to look away, focusing on the ledger until the elegant script blurred before my eyes. The small, almost touches continued, becoming a silent language between us. When he passed me a heavy ledger, his fingers would brush against mine, a fleeting contact that sent a spark up my arm. Once, I dropped a pen, and we both bent to get it at the same time. Our heads were inches apart under the table. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the subtle silver in his stubble. We stayed there for a half-second too long, the pen forgotten on the floor, the air charged with unspoken words. He pulled back first, a slight flush on his cheekbones. The tension was building, a fine, high-strung wire between us. It was in the silences that stretched a little too long, the eye contact that held for a beat more than was strictly professional. I lived for those moments, and I was terrified of them. He was my employer. He was wealthy, powerful, 2 decades my senior. The imbalance was a chasm between us. And yet, when he looked at me, when he spoke to me about his life, that chasm seemed to shrink until it was nothing more than a space we could easily cross. The breakthrough came on a Friday night. A massive storm had blown in, snarling traffic and turning the streets into rivers. Eleanor had left at 5, but I had stayed late, wanting to finish cataloging a particularly fragile album. Arthur was still in his office, the low murmur of his voice a familiar backdrop. Around 7, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the penthouse into near-total darkness. The only illumination came from the emergency lights in the corridor and the frantic, silent flashes of lightning outside the massive windows. My computer screen went black. The silence was sudden and absolute. "Leo." Arthur's voice came from his office, calm and steady. "I'm here." I called out, my own voice sounding shaky. A moment later, his office door opened, and he emerged, the beam of his phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. He played it over me, and I must have looked as scared as I felt, because his expression softened. "Power grid failure," he said. "The backup generators will kick in for the main hotel systems, but the non-essential floors might be out for a while. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound convincing. No, you're not. He walked over, his presence a comfort in the dark. You're pale. Let's get you away from the windows. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the city in a stark, beautiful, and terrifying panorama. He led me into his office. It was a vast, elegant space that I had only ever glimpsed through the glass doors. One entire wall was a window overlooking the city. A huge mahogany desk stood at one end, and a comfortable-looking leather sofa and armchairs were arranged around a fireplace at the other. He used a lighter to ignite the kindling in the hearth, and a moment later, a warm, crackling fire pushed back the shadows. "Better," he said, his face cast in the flickering firelight. He looked less like a CEO and more like the lord of a manor. "The building is perfectly safe, but the elevators will be down for a while. We might be here for a bit." He went to a discreet bar in the corner and came back with 2 glasses and a bottle of what looked like very expensive whiskey. He poured a small amount into each glass. "To keep the chill off," he said, handing one to me. I took it, my fingers brushing his. This time, the touch was not accidental. His fingers lingered on mine for a fraction of a second, a deliberate, gentle pressure. I looked up at him, and in the warm, dancing light of the fire, his eyes were dark and intense. We sat on the leather sofa, a respectable distance between us, and sipped the whiskey. It was smooth and smoky, warming me from the inside out. The storm raged outside, but in here, with the fire and the quiet company, it felt a world away. "Tell me, Leo," he said after a long, comfortable silence. "What were you running from when you came here?" The question was so direct, so gentle, that the walls I had built around that part of my life just crumbled. The whiskey had loosened my tongue, and the strange, insulated intimacy of the moment made confession feel possible. So I told him. I told him about the small bookstore I had tried to open with my ex-partner, Daniel, about pouring all my savings and my heart into it. And I told him about how Daniel had left, not just me, but the business, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a broken heart. I told him about the shame of having to sell everything, of having to pack what was left into that one cardboard box. He listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on my face. The firelight played over his strong features, and his expression was one of deep, compassionate attention. When I finished, my voice thick with unshed tears, he didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He just said, "He was a fool to leave you." The simple, unequivocal statement landed in my chest with a profound weight. He wasn't pitying me. He was validating me. He shifted on the sofa, turning to face me more fully. "I worry sometimes," he said, his voice low and serious. "I worry that in trying to build a shelter, I've inadvertently built a cage. I brought you up here, gave you this job. I worry that you feel obligated, that you don't feel you have a choice." My heart started to pound. This was it. The conversation that had been brewing in the silences and the almost touches for weeks. "Arthur," I started, my voice hoarse. "You didn't." I look at him, at this kind, steady, powerful man who had shown me more consideration than anyone in my entire life. I've never felt more free. The truth of the words surprised even me. In this quiet space he had created for me, I had started to heal. I had started to feel like myself again. He reached out then, his hand covering mine where it rested on the sofa cushion. His touch was warm and sure. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a connection, an offering. "I'm glad," he whispered, "because I find myself wanting more. More than these quiet afternoons. But I would never, not if you didn't want it too." He was giving me the power. He was laying his own vulnerability bare, admitting his feelings while explicitly stating that my consent was the only thing that mattered. I looked from his hand on mine to his face. The firelight carved shadows and highlights, making him look both noble and achingly human. The yearning I had been suppressing for weeks rose up in me, sharp and clear. I knew the risks. I knew the complications. But in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the truth. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his. His grip tightened, a silent affirmation. "I want it too," I said, the words a quiet revelation in the firelit room. His shoulders slumped with a relief so profound it was almost palpable. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming it, making him look younger, less burdened. The storm could have torn the city apart outside, and I wouldn't have noticed. The world had shrunk to the space between us, to the warmth of our joined hands and the promise in his eyes. The power came back on with a sudden hum, the lights in the office flickering to life. The abrupt return to normalcy should have been jarring, but it wasn't. The moment held. The spell wasn't broken. He didn't pull his hand away, and neither did I. The weeks following the storm were a study in quiet transformation. Nothing, and yet everything, had changed. We didn't speak of that night in his office, not at first. There was no need. It lived between us now, a shared and acknowledged truth. The tension was still there, but it was different. It was no longer the high-strung wire of uncertainty, but the warm, humming current of anticipation. Our afternoon conversations continued, but now they were laced with a new intimacy. His gaze would linger on my mouth when I spoke. I would find myself watching the way his hands moved, the strength in his fingers as he held a coffee mug. The small touches became less accidental. A hand on the small of my back as he guided me through a doorway. His arm brushing mine as we stood side by side, looking at an old photograph. Each touch was a question, and my stillness, my leaning into it, was the answer. But the world outside our quiet sanctuary on the penthouse floor continued to turn. And it was only a matter of time before it intruded. It came in the form of a man named Marcus Thorne, a senior vice president with a slick smile and eyes that missed nothing. He had always treated me with a kind of polite disdain when I was just another member of the floor staff. Now that I was working in the penthouse, his disdain had sharpened into a suspicious curiosity. I was in the staff canteen one afternoon, grabbing a quick lunch, when Thorne sat down at my table uninvited. "Leo," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Settling in well upstairs?" "It's going well, thank you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll bet it is," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Quite a promotion. From banquet server to Mr. Blackwood's personal archivist. You must have some hidden talents." The insinuation was as subtle as a punch to the gut. He was painting my opportunity as something sordid, my presence upstairs as a favor bought and paid for. Rage, cold and sharp, rose in me. But I remembered Arthur's quiet strength, the way he never rose to a bait. I took a slow breath. "I'm qualified for the work," I said, my voice steady. "Mr. Blackwood values discretion and attention to detail." I met his gaze directly. "Perhaps you should try it sometime." I stood up, leaving my half-eaten lunch, and walked away without another word. My hands were shaking, but my head was held high. Still, his words were like poison. They tapped into every fear I had about the power imbalance, about how this would look to other people. Was this all they would ever see? A young, struggling man and his wealthy, older benefactor? The incident must have reached Arthur's ears, because the next afternoon, he was different. He was quieter, his brow furrowed with a tension that hadn't been there before. He came over to my desk, but instead of his usual easy conversation, he got straight to the point. "Leo, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me," he said, his voice low and serious. My stomach twisted. "Of course, are you happy here? In this role? In this building?" He paused, his gray eyes searching mine. "Is this what you want? Or is it just the easiest path right now?" He was offering me an out. Because of Thorne, because of the gossip he knew was inevitable, he was giving me a chance to walk away, no questions asked. He was protecting me, even if it meant losing me. The selflessness of it hit me hard. This is the moment. This is where I either retreat into my fear or step forward into the truth. I stand up, so we're on the same level. The few inches of height he has on me no longer feel intimidating. I feel his equal in this, because he has made me his equal. "Arthur," I say, my voice clear and firm. "Working here, in this room, has been the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. But it's not about the job." I take a breath, the confession sitting on my tongue. "It's about you." The admission hangs in the quiet space between us. His eyes widen almost imperceptibly. The tension in his shoulders seems to melt away, replaced by a raw, profound stillness. "I don't care what people like Marcus Thorne think." I continue, my voice gaining strength with every word. "I know what this is. You built me a shelter, you were right. But you never once made me feel trapped in it. You made me feel safe enough to want to walk out of it and stand on my own. With you, he closes the small space between us. He doesn't touch me yet, but his presence is all-encompassing. He smells of clean linen and that subtle, expensive cologne that I now associate with him, with home. Leo, he breathes. My name is soft, reverent sound. You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that," he lifts a hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. The touch is electric, a promise of everything that has been simmering beneath the surface. His gaze drops to my lips, and I see the question in his eyes. I give him the answer. I lean in, closing that final inch of distance, and press my lips to his. The kiss is nothing like I imagined. It's not a desperate, pent-up release of tension. It's slow. It's gentle. It's a discovery. His lips are firm and warm, and he tastes faintly of coffee and of himself. He doesn't push, doesn't demand. He just receives. He lets me set the pace, lets me be the one to bridge the final gap. After a moment, I feel his hand come up to cup the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. He kisses me back, a soft pressure that speaks of weeks of restraint, of a deep and patient wanting. It feels like coming home. It feels right. Utterly, unequivocally right. When we finally break apart, we don't move away. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I can feel his breath on my cheek, warm and steady. My own breathing is ragged. My hands have found their way to his waist, gripping the soft cashmere of his sweater as if to anchor myself. So, he murmurs, his voice thick with emotion. This is what we are, yes, I whisper back, my eyes still closed, savoring the feeling of his closeness, the solid reality of him. This is what we are. He pulls back just enough to look at me, his hands moving to frame my face. There's a universe of emotion in his gray eyes, relief, tenderness, and a vulnerability I've never seen in him before. I was so afraid, he admits, his voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of pushing you. Afraid of being another man who used his power to take what he wanted. You never did. I say, my voice fierce with conviction. You used your power to give. You gave me a safe place. You gave me a choice. You gave me back my confidence. I place my hands over his. This, I say, gesturing between us. This is the first thing in a long time that feels like it's truly mine. Truly ours. A slow smile spreads across his face. The real, unguarded smile I have come to cherish. Ours, he repeats, as if testing the word. I like the sound of that. And he leans in and kisses me again. And this time there is no hesitation, no uncertainty. There is only the quiet, profound joy of two people who have finally found their way home. The morning after felt like waking up in a different world. I went to my small apartment, but the air inside felt thin and foreign. The memory of the kiss, of Arthur's hands on my face, the quiet intensity in his eyes, was more real than my own furniture. A part of me was soaring, filled with a light and a hope I hadn't felt in years. Another part, the cautious, wounded part, was terrified. What now? The question echoed in my head as I got ready for work. We had crossed a line, a beautiful, terrifying line. But the practical realities of our lives hadn't changed. He was still Arthur Blackwood, my boss, the owner of the hotel. I was still Leo, his employee, the man with the single box of possessions. The power imbalance hadn't vanished with a kiss. If anything, it felt more pronounced, more dangerous. I walked into the penthouse suite that morning with my heart hammering against my ribs. I was half convinced he would be different, that there would be an awkwardness, a retreat into professionalism, or worse, an assumption of ownership. I steeled myself for disappointment, for the beautiful moment to curdle into a complicated reality. He was already in his office, on the phone, his back to the glass doors. I settled at my desk, my hands trembling slightly as I turned on my computer. I tried to focus on the familiar task of scanning the old ledgers, but the script swam before my eyes. Every nerve ending felt alive, waiting. A few minutes later, he finished his call. I heard his chair scrape back. I held my breath. He walked out of his office, a coffee mug in his hand, just like any other morning. He stopped by my desk. I forced myself to look up at him. His expression was calm, his eyes soft. He didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a warmth in his face that was new, a tenderness that was just for me. "Good morning, Leo," he said, his voice the same steady, low tone as always. "Good morning, Arthur." I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. He just stood there for a moment, letting the simple exchange settle between us. There was no awkwardness, no regret, just a quiet confirmation. He took a sip of his coffee. "I have a board meeting all morning," he said, "but I've asked them to send up lunch for us around 1, in my private dining room. If that's all right with you." It was a simple invitation, but it was everything. He was moving us out of the workspace, into a personal space. He was asking, not telling. He was giving me the choice. I'd like that, I said, a real smile finally breaking through my anxiety. Good, he said. And then, in a gesture so subtle no one would ever notice, he reached out as if to point to something on my screen, and his fingers brushed the back of my hand. A brief, warm, deliberate touch. A reassurance. Then he was gone, heading down the hall to his meeting. I let out a long, slow breath. He understood. He wasn't going to let this become a sordid office affair. He was going to handle it with the same care and integrity with which he handled everything else. The fear in my chest began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fluttering excitement. At 1 o'clock, I made my way to the small, elegant dining room attached to his office suite. A table was set for two by a window with a breathtaking view of the city. A simple but delicious-looking lunch was laid out. Arthur was already there, waiting for me. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, making him look more relaxed. "I hope you're hungry," he said, pulling out a chair for me. As we ate, we talked. But this conversation was different. It was practical. "I've been thinking," he began, setting down his fork. "About Marcus Thorne. About the situation." My stomach tightened again. "Arthur, I can handle him. I know you can," he said immediately. "That's not what this is about. This is about creating a space for us that isn't under the microscope of my company. A space where you are not my employee." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've spoken with the curator of the City Historical Society. They have a massive collection of uncatalogued archives, a project they've been trying to get funded for years. I'm going to fund it, and I'm going to recommend a very promising young archivist to lead it." I stared at him, speechless. "It's a real job, Leo," he continued, his voice firm, as if anticipating my fears. "A proper contract, with the society, not with me. It would be your project. Your independence. It pays well, better than what you're making now. But," he paused, his eyes holding mine, "it would mean you wouldn't be working here, just down the hall from me. Every day." He was laying it all out, the pros and the cons. He was solving the power dynamic problem, but creating a new problem of distance. And he was, once again, leaving the choice entirely up to me. "It's your decision," he finished softly. "Completely. We can figure out another way if you'd rather stay. But I wanted you to have an option that was clean, untouchable." I looked at this incredible man, at the lengths he would go to in order to make this right, to make me feel secure and respected. He wasn't just fixing a problem. He was building me a future, a career, something that was mine alone. He was giving me back the agency Daniel had stolen from me. Tears pricked my eyes. "You would do that?" I whispered. "I would do a great deal more than that for you," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I didn't need to think about it. "I'll take the job," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The relief that washed over his face was my answer. This had been weighing on him, more than he had let on. That weekend marked the true beginning. He invited me to his home, not the formal penthouse on top of the hotel, but his actual home, a beautiful old house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. It was filled with books and art and comfortable furniture. It felt lived in. It felt like him. We spent the day talking, cooking a simple meal together in his large, warm kitchen, and just being. There was no pressure, no expectation. He showed me his library, his hands brushing mine as we reached for the same book. We sat on the porch as evening fell, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black, a comfortable silence settling between us. Later, as we sat on the sofa in front of a low fire, he turned to me. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a question or a command. It was a simple, heartfelt plea. "You don't have to. There's a guest room. But I'd like it if you'd stay with me," and I did. That night, I learned the geography of his skin, the quiet sounds he made in his sleep, the solid, comforting weight of his arm around me. It was tender and unhurried, an intimacy of emotion far more profound than the physical act itself. It was a sealing of the bond that had been growing between us for months. Lying there in the dark, my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, I finally felt the last of my fear dissolve. The age difference, the wealth, the worlds we came from, they were all just details. They were the context, not the story. The story was this: the quiet strength of this man, his fundamental decency, his patient, steady heart. And my heart, which had been so guarded and broken, answering his. The next few weeks were a transition. I finished my work at the hotel, packing up the archives with a sense of bittersweet accomplishment. On my last day, Marcus Thorne saw me leaving with a small box of my personal effects. He gave me a smirk, clearly assuming I'd been quietly dismissed. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I just smiled a small, genuine smile. His opinion had no power over me anymore. I knew the truth. I started my new job at the Historical Society the following Monday. The work was challenging and exciting. I had a team, a budget, and a purpose that was all my own. Arthur was meticulous about keeping our worlds separate. He never visited me at work. He never pulled strings. He let me build my own reputation, my own success. But every evening, I would come home to him. Home. It was a word I hadn't let myself use for a long time. But that's what his house had become. It was our sanctuary. We built a new life in the quiet evenings and the lazy weekends. We learned each other's habits, the small things that made a life together. I learned that he was a terrible singer but a surprisingly good dancer, that he had a weakness for old black and white movies, that he fell asleep with a book on his chest nearly every night. He learned that I hummed when I was concentrating, that I needed a quiet cup of tea first thing in the morning, that I still sometimes had nightmares about the bookstore failing. When I did, he would just hold me until they passed. One Saturday morning, we were in the kitchen, making breakfast together. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. I was scrambling eggs while he made coffee, the movements easy and familiar. A comfortable silence stretched between us, filled only by the sizzle of the eggs and the gurgle of the coffee maker. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against his solid frame, my hands stilling over the pan. "Happy," he murmured into my ear, his voice warm and a little rough with sleep. I looked around the sun-drenched kitchen, at this man holding me, at the life we were building, brick by brick, with care and trust and quiet love. I thought of the desperate, lonely person I was just a few months ago, hiding in a concrete stairwell with a box of broken dreams. It felt like another lifetime. He had carried that box for me. And then, just as he'd promised, he had carried me, too. Not by lifting me out of my life, but by walking beside me, by lending me his strength until I could find my own again. I turned in his arms, my back against the warm stove, and looped my arms around his neck. I looked into his steady, gray eyes, eyes that had seen me at my lowest and had seen something worth cherishing. "More than happy," I said, my voice full of a certainty that was as deep and true as anything I had ever known. "I'm home," and I kissed him, a slow, grateful kiss in the morning sun. It wasn't a climax, not an endpoint. It was just one quiet moment in a lifetime of quiet moments to come. It was a new beginning. It was everything. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.